Hello and welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. How important is it to you to study trends and to see things differently? Or is Google simply acting as your compass? Are you using megatrends to predict your future? So I'm welcoming back a guest from episode 86 for a part 2 to talk about his final book in the series that spanned a decade, over 1 million readers, and 10 books in the series. Rohit Bhargava is the best-selling author of Non-Obvious Megatrends, How to See What Others Miss and Predict the Future, a professor, keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, and the founder and chief trend curator for the Non-Obvious Company. And on this episode, we'll discuss trends and megatrends, data, technology, empathy, ungendering, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a trendy predictor with a very trendy mega shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Well, Rohit, welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. You know, we've done this once before, but if you will, for the audience that maybe hasn't heard a previous episode or gotten a copy of the book, tell us a brief overview of your background and your career to date.
Sure. I started in marketing, and I think to some degree I'm still in marketing, which means if I'm doing it well, I'm a storyteller.
Sure.
And that's kind of how I describe myself. So I tell a lot of stories, and what I am currently trying to do is help people be more interesting. And I do that by having a company called the Non-Obvious Company, and I write books and deliver talks and do all of those sorts of things.
Well, again, congratulations on yet another outstanding book on the Non-Obvious Megatrends 10th edition. Again, crazy accolades. I know I talked about them last year, but I'm big fans of a lot of the people that have written nice things about you and your books. Dan Pink, Ann Hanley, Scott Stratton, Guy Kawasaki, Sally Hogshead. And most importantly, because he's a relative of sorts, I don't know the guy, but it's the CMO of the San Jose Sharks. So anything shark related is obviously really cool to me. But
I'll have to introduce you. I will.
That'd be great. But so if they've gotten one of these books before, if they've gotten one of the copies of non-obvious megatrends, why should they get another? I know how I would answer that, but I'm obviously curious as the author how what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think just to explain to people, so there's this book that I have done in the past every year, and the difference every year is that there's 15 new trends that are for the upcoming year.
Mm-hmm.
And what's different this time around with non-obvious megatrends is it's the 10th year that I'm doing this, and so I've done something totally different, which is I've gone backwards over the past 10 years, looked at the biggest trends, and then pulled it and elevated the thinking even bigger to say, what is the mega trend here, the trend that's going to last for more than 1 year? And part of the reason I'm doing that is because this is actually the last edition. So this is the last time I'm doing it. And so what you'll find in this year's edition is not only elevated thinking that recaps many of the previous trends and pushes them forward, but also there's this detailed appendix of every past trend along with grades for how they did over time. So there's a lot of transparency in this too.
So why is this the last one? Why stop at 10?
I think the biggest reason was it just kind of felt like a nice place to end it with a 10-year project.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, it's a lot of work. I mean, anybody who's had to tackle one of these big things like writing a book, I mean, doing that every year is a huge undertaking. And I just kind of felt like it was time to move on to other things.
Yeah, well, I haven't done this in reverse order by reading necessarily a prior year, but I've read this now 4 years in a row, or maybe it's 5 years in a row. But I do think it's helpful for people to understand where we were, say, in 2010 or 2014, 17, whatever. But how should someone think about, really looking at these mega trends differently today than when they may have, 5-6 years ago when they read an earlier edition of your book?
I think that to some degree, I feel like I've gotten a little bit more, maybe call it sophisticated or mature, or just call it older, as I've gone, as I've gone through this process. And what that's meant is I don't do as much maybe retrofitting as I did before. I mean, before I might land on an idea or a trend, and I'd find some research for it and say, oh, this is a great idea, this is a great concept, and then I'd go out and kind of find more to support it.
Sure.
Which is okay, and it works. But this time I really followed the stories. I followed the research. I followed what the insights were telling me, and I crafted the mega trends around that. And so I think because of that, what maybe readers will find is even more relevance in terms of the stories and the trends, where when they see something outlined in the way that I outline a megatrend, my intent is initially for people to say, oh, it's interesting that he packaged it that way, and that is non-obvious. But as you read it, I want people to think, oh, you know what? I've seen that before, like, and I've seen that, and I've seen that, but I never put the pieces together in this way. And that's really what I try and do in the book.
Yeah, I think for me, when I read through this, I started thinking of the previous, and this is probably a horrible analogy, but I started thinking of the previous ones more as tactic related, just as something that my campaign brain kicked in, and now I see this one more as strategy. And so when if you think of tactics versus strategies, it just allows you to be able to see something from a different perspective, if you will. And that was one of the appreciations I got. It just gave a much better overarching view.
Yeah, it's interesting you would say that. I mean, I appreciate that, and I think you're probably spot on. I think that one of the things, though, that we sometimes think when it comes to strategic thinking is that it's not actionable. Like when you
Yes,
focus so much on
exactly.
strategy, it's like you overplan, but you don't actually do
Yeah,
anything. And so a lot of what I tried to do in the book was bring that strategic vision, bring that thinking, but also give people really practical, like do this, do this, do this, to the point where at the end of every megatrend chapter, there's literally 3 suggestions for stealable ideas and things that you can do tomorrow to
uh,
use it.
yeah, spot on. No, it's in between, if anything. It's just again sort of a bad way of me trying to put a label on it, but that's a much better explanation. So, you write at the first of each of the books why I wrote this book. Now that we've passed 10 great years of these, I'd love to ask, why did you write these books? If you look back on it from that perspective and sort of reflect back on your 10 years with writing them, why did you write these books?
When I started writing them, I think I was coming from a place of frustration. And my frustration was that I was reading all of these stories and articles and sometimes books and sometimes reports that were saying these are the big trends.
Yeah.
And what they seemed to be describing was either blatantly obvious, not really a trend, just like a declaration of a platform that exists or a technology that exists, and no, it lacked insight. They didn't have anything of value to offer. And so that frustration caused me to write my first version of this report back in 2011, which took off. So I did it again, then I did it again, then I did it again. So I did it for 4 years as a report. And eventually, in the 5th year, I turned it into a full length book. And the reason I turned it into the full length book at that time was because more and more people were asking me, look, these trends are great and they're amazing and we can use them, but like, can we do that ourselves? Like,
Yeah.
is there like, what's the process you use to do that? And at the point when I turned it into the book in 2015, I wrote about the process. And so to me, like, to answer your question, like, why do I do this for 10 years? Why have I done it for 10 years? It's not because I have a burning need to tell people what trends are every year. The reason I've done it over and over again, and the reason why I turned it into the book in the first place, is because I believe that the world needs more non-obvious thinkers. I believe that we need to
Amen.
break out of that narrow-mindedness, right? Like, we need to leave the algorithm behind and not believe that anyone who doesn't think like us must be an idiot, and be more open-minded. Like that's what I'm trying to put out into the world, and that's really what this book is about. Like, be a non-obvious thinker, think for yourself, make up your own mind, uh, embrace other viewpoints. Like, that's what I want people to do.
Yeah, I'm sure you get asked this because I know I did, and I turned most of these away. Do you get asked all the time to do trends ahead for the year that every little media publication will put together?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked to contribute to various things, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. I mean, actually, ironically, a couple of weeks after my book comes out, there's a compilation book called Aftershock that has 50 futurists, or people who describe themselves as futurists, really, really smart people, each writing a chapter about
Mm-hmm.
what's coming next. And so I contributed a chapter for that because I thought it's an amazing project, and there's some really, really smart people involved in it, right? So I will get asked to do those sorts of things, but the question that I get most often, which is so fascinating, and I have to recalibrate the way that I answer it, is someone will invite me to do a talk for whatever their industry is, and they'll say, "We love the trends. We want to be innovative. Can you tell us the 5 trends that matter for the jewelry industry?" Or, what are the 5 trends for financial services? Or what are the 5 healthcare trends? And if you read this book, the megatrends are not indexed by industry intentionally. They're indexed by behavior, they're indexed by mindset. in each one of them, you'll find examples from financial services. You'll find examples from healthcare. And in some ways, I didn't realize how valuable that would be until I started taking this book and having to chunk it into a keynote presentation. And I realized that if somebody says, look, what are the 5 trends that matter for financial services? I will say to them, I don't talk about 5 trends just for financial services, but I have plenty of financial services examples to show you inside of those trends. But I want to challenge you to think outside of your industry, and that's why you're hiring me in the first place. So
Agreed.
I have that, I have those pieces, but it's so fascinating how narrow industry focused people tend to be when it comes to innovation, which by definition shouldn't be so narrow minded.
It's uber important to me, and it's a reason that I love these books and the ideas behind them. Why is it to you so important to be curious, whether it's as a marketer, business leader, or anything else? And it really kind of goes for being able to think for yourself and do something differently. But what is it about curiosity that you've seen with somebody who's been spotting trends, and what does that mean to you?
Well, to me, the idea of curiosity is really interesting because a lot of times when people say be curious, what they're trying to say is literally be curious. But I don't actually think that's a problem that most of us have. We are naturally curious. Humans are curious. The problem we have is that we silence that curiosity
Yeah.
voice and we go off and do something else. And so we wonder, like, hey, why is this like this? Or we wonder, like, the answer to, like, why something's going on in a certain way. But we never take that moment, that next step to figure it out, to ask a question, to have a conversation with somebody. And there's one group of people who do take the time to do that, who always take the time to do it, who always ask the question, and it's kids. And I think that if we have kids in our lives, we have a natural curiosity monster right there unleashing itself and asking us questions all the time. And so now, because it's even more important for us as parents or uncles or aunts or whatever, uh, to engage our curiosity to help them engage theirs. And that's a really, really beautiful thing that you get as a benefit of having children in your life.
I could not agree more. I get an hour of those questions, if not every day, every morning, and then every evening. So I could not agree more with that statement. Did you ever have a problem seeing any of the trends over the years as something that's trend worthy? And what I mean by that is that if you look at a lot of, say, Google trended query data, just a collection of data and keywords, and if you'll see a lot of what people are talking about, whether it's, I don't know, AI or empathy or data privacy and things like that. If you took a step back to really analyze these, were whether or not they were necessarily trends to you or something bigger, was that a problem or something that you ever found like was forgive me when I say this, a boring trend versus trends that were really interesting and stood out to you?
Uh, it's a tough one to answer because boring is relative. I mean,
Well, that's
if
true.
if I if I found it boring, I wouldn't write about it. So I personally find all of the trends riveting. Otherwise, why would I write it? But I don't believe that everyone will find every megatrend equally interesting. Some people are interested in different things, and some stories will really relate to someone, and they'll personally connect with it. And so, like, oh, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly what I've been seeing in the world, and this is so interesting," right? And some people will say, that trend is, oh man, I can see why sometimes you're a professor. This is just not up my alley, and that's okay because the other thing that I love about business books, and I do a lot of reading of a lot of types of books. I read fiction and science fiction, poetry, and screenplays, and lots of stuff. I'm a consumer of reading. I love reading. I'm an English major. I did a master's in English. I mean, that's my world, right? And the beautiful thing about business books, as opposed to many of those other books, is you don't have to read them cover to cover. I mean, this book in part 2 has 10 megatrends, and they don't. There's a flow to them, but they don't require you to read the previous trend in order to know what's happening in the next one. So you could literally jump into this book, read chapter 8 only, and it would make sense. You would be okay. And that I kind of like because what it does is it makes the book easier to read in pieces. So it's almost like a book of short stories. So you could read it like on the beach or on the train or whatever. But it also gives you permission to not have to read the book cover to cover because we're all busy. We all have stuff to do, and sometimes things come up, and we put too much pressure on ourselves. I think to start a book and then say, "Oh, I have to finish this now. I have to get." It's like that binge watching mentality. Like I watched season 1 and now there's like 18 more seasons. Like I
Yeah.
gotta make it through them, right?
Yeah.
And at some point it kind of becomes work instead of pleasure.
Let's jump into a few of the trends that I read through in the book that really sort of stood out. One, obviously, is the trend of empathy, and with the evolution of the human mode. You speak about enterprise empathy, and that being the trend with how companies leverage that to be a driver of innovation, revenue, and differentiation. If you were sitting with a CEO today, without getting too tactical, what do you tell them about how to take the trend of enterprise empathy and really apply it to their business? What should they read or get out of that chapter and understand better for their business and how to apply it?
What I tell a CEO if they're thinking about generating value from empathy is that doing business in a more human way allows you to improve two critical business elements. Number one, if you can do business with more empathy and create products and services with more empathy, your customers will be more likely to recommend you. That whole net promoter thing goes off
Mm-hmm.
the charts.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of just having satisfied customers, right? And the satisfied customers, you gave me what I expected, I got it, I'm done, we're never talking again. That's a satisfied customer, right? A delighted customer is different. A delighted customer comes back over and over, they rave about you, like that's the customer we want, right? And empathy impacts that customer getting more of those customers. So that's the number one business benefit. The number two business benefit is that a company that does business with empathy and puts humans at the center and treats them in more empathetic ways holds on to their best people, retention. So you don't have to replace your whole staff all the time. And that's another huge benefit that most smart managers and smart CEOs know. So if you said to a CEO, like, there's this magic element, this one magic thing that can cause you to have more delighted customers and retain your best people longer, why wouldn't you focus on that?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. So another chapter, you talk about ungendering, and I wish you'd unpack that a little bit about the evolution of ungendering, what you've seen, and how you pointed out in the book, and why that should or should not matter to businesses today. Why that should matter as a trend.
Yeah, ungendering for some people can kind of feel like a scary trend because we see a lot of stories out there of people who maybe we don't think look like us and who we don't think act like us, and it seems like this foreign thing uh, that there's more than two genders, right? But I think ultimately what ungendering comes down to is this fundamental question that we used to put as second or third on our forms, right? We'd say, what's your first name? What's your last name? What's your gender? Is no longer that clear cut of a statement. People see it as a statement of their identity rather than a simple yes or no question, or binary question, I should say. And when people see gender or the way they describe their gender as a part of their identity, what they're really doing is what all of us do, whether it's related to gender or not, which is we seek understanding for who we want to be in the world. And that's really what people are putting out there with the question of gender and of ungendering. And what they're saying to the world is, I want you to see me not in terms of this one category of male or one category of female. I believe myself to be something different, something unique. And that's not that hard to understand. I mean, you may not understand what the 75 different categories of gender that are listed on the Facebook dropdown mean, uh, but that is not the point. The point is we should try and have empathy for how people want to be seen in the world, how they want themselves to be treated. And they're really publicly declaring it. I mean, I get emails now, you might get them as well, from people who in their email signature it says my preferred pronouns are, and then it tells you what their preferred pronouns are, how they like to be addressed. And that's a pretty out there statement saying this is how I want to be treated. And if someone does that, especially in a business context, right? If your customer says, this is what I want to be called, you imagine those forums where we ask people their first name, their last name, and then we ask them their nickname, right? And I'm not equating gender with nickname, but I'm just saying that like we put ourselves out there to say, however you want to be treated, like that's how we want to treat you, because that's what great companies do with their customers. And this is another element of that, and we need to pay attention to it and respect it.
Yeah, to that point, my nickname's Shark, so I don't even know what that would tell you about how I want to be addressed and what that means. But I this is one of the chapters that I think I really struggle with, and I'm not trying to get into political thoughts on how somebody should look at it, but this is one of the ones that I think it's hard for people. One, obviously, I agree with you on empathy and how people should be treated better. We should show more empathy in businesses for people. I think this is one of the ones though that is going to become muddier because I don't know that there's necessarily, for multiple millennia, we've understood things only one way, and it's hard for people to change something as physical as the nature of whether or not somebody male or female and how they declare it. It's been that way forever, and then within all the last few years, now we're starting to see this as a trend. And again, I'm not trying to be political about it. I think this is one that is going to be probably easier for people to at least understand the need for empathy than necessarily know how to execute this well. And I don't know if that's
Yeah, and
the
I think
proper way of
I
saying
mean,
it. It's just
look, I think that the intent of a book like this, like the one that I tried to write, is not necessarily to tell people how to
absolutely.
think, or even to tell them that they have to change the way they see the world. What I'm really trying to do is just demonstrate to people that there are all these different ways that the world is evolving.
Yeah,
And I think that the more you know about that, and the more you appreciate it, at least it's not this like foreign idea that you've never even heard, right? And I
yeah.
think there's value in just that alone.
Yeah, and let me add, I didn't find that you made a political statement at all either, because I'm not trying to come off as for or against either one. I think you are absolutely spot on for challenging people, if they will, to think about it and to recognize the trend. It's a trend. It's not something to necessarily only individualize and take an opinion on. So,
Yeah, and
uh,
it's the other thing is, I mean, I talk about this in one of the other trends, which I call purposeful profit, uh,
yes,
which is the idea that we expect and want companies to have a purpose and to state that purpose. And my version of that in a book like this is, yeah, I want to present alternate viewpoints and I want to kind of share the way the world is, but I also don't want people to walk away saying, well, I can just think whatever I want to think,
exactly. Yeah,
because I'm not saying that either. Like, I believe that there are lies and I believe that there are liars, and I don't think that's right. I think that we should appreciate that there are some things that are factual, and we should, respect that. And I
absolutely.
think that a world where there is no such thing as fact is a pretty dangerous world, because now anyone can make up anything and have it have some value attached to it, and I don't think that's right.
Well, so you as a marketer, business leader, speaker at a lot of conferences, an author, is there anything necessarily overarching to you that you've noticed in all of them that sums up into one big takeaway for you over the years, over the, say, last 10 years of writing these? Has any one mega trend jumped out the most to you?
I think that the macro idea of how much of our lives we are willing to give up to technology
Yeah.
and how much of our lives we are actively trying to take back from technology is a big, big theme that comes across multiple trends, even in this Megatrends book, right? I mean, we talked about human mode. We didn't really talk about protective technology, which is another one of the trends about like technology that takes information about us in the attempt to protect us, but maybe we don't want the protection or we don't need it in that way, or we're not willing to give the privacy up, right? And the back and forth around that. So, like, that is a macro theme that we are all dealing with right now. How much control do we want these computers to have? How much benefit is there for the machines to be able to do these things? And what's our relationship with them in a very human way? I mean, there was this amazing story that I read of people who got this robotic pet. His name was Jibo. And it was like this little cute little robot, and it was cute, right? And they made it cute, and you could talk to it by voice, like Amazon Alexa or any one of those things. And then the company behind Jibo went under and stopped supporting Jibo. And you had all these people who had Jibo, this cute little robot that sat in your kitchen, looking at you, and then it would start having glitches, and nobody was fixing it. And it was like witnessing this slow death of this, almost like a member of the family, like a pet, is how some people wrote about it. And if you don't have a robot in your house and you're not familiar with that, that probably seems weird. Just like it seems weird if you're not a pet owner that someone could be that worked up about a pet that's passing away, right? Because if you're not in that situation, it's hard for you to understand just how emotional it is. But what was fascinating is we can develop, I mean, we're human and we can develop these emotions for machines, just like we do for other animals. And that is going to continue and get more prevalent.
Yeah, especially with what we're seeing coming out of CES. I could not agree more. I saw several of those types of things. It's
Yeah.
little scary how they're becoming that quickly adapted to it. So, this is a question that doesn't necessarily apply to the chapter of amplified identity, but it made me think, about you. I've seen you speak. I've followed, where you're speaking, a lot of events. Do you find that it's difficult at all to pivot from being known as the non-obvious trends guy to something else? Is that something you personally as a speaker will ever, do you think, wrestle with evolving from trend data to something else? And the
Uh,
reason I ask that is, so another one of your books, The Non-Obvious Guide to Small Business Marketing, I've also read that one. Now again, it's looking at things differently through the non-obvious brand, but obviously you've been doing trend data for 10 years. How do you sort of evolve your brand to move away from these trend books?
it is a little bit, and I would say I haven't really tried too hard to do that. I mean, the way that I've done it, and I have a couple different topics. I mean, the way I do it right now is if you were a event booker and you were looking at me as a speaker, I have two big buckets that I can talk about. One is trends in the future and innovation. That's one bucket. The
Mm-hmm.
other bucket is marketing, trust, and what it takes to be a great storyteller, which is based on my two previous books before the Trend series.
Right.
That actually really benefits me because sometimes you'll have an event planner who sees your stuff as a speaker and says, "Oh, this guy's great," but then they'll look at my topic and be like, "Oh, but we already have a futurist on the
Exactly.
schedule. So like we can't get too futurist." And in which case I can walk in and say, "Hey, okay, you don't need the futurist stuff, but over here I've got this great talk about trust and marketing and storytelling, and now I get the gig," right? So I do think that I've unified it, hopefully, from a branding messaging point of view, under this idea of non-obvious as opposed to trends. And that's actually, frankly, the other reason why I'm not doing this series again, because I want this brand of non-obvious to be much bigger than just the trend book. So I've
Yeah, and
already launched the entire guidebook series. You mentioned one of them, but there's all these other authors writing other guides for the series because I'm trying
mm-hmm.
to launch it to compete with the dummies guides.
Yeah.
And so it's not only my thought leadership anymore. We have all these other people under the platform.
Well, I think this is so important to note because of the brands that you're building, because so many people get caught up either in a lack of focus when trying to define themselves with being everything for everybody, or they're worried about being too focused on only one thing. And I think you're brilliantly showing that there can be several different things, and it doesn't have to be only one, and it doesn't have to be everything to everybody. So you've done it masterfully, and I applaud you, and good luck going after
Well,
the dummy folks.
yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that the lesson from that is, and anyone who says, "Oh, I'm worried that I'm focusing too narrowly," that is only a problem if you're focusing too narrowly on something nobody wants.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because if you're focusing narrowly and you're the world's greatest expert on something people want, like you should lean into that. I mean, that's great, right? The problem is if you focus too narrowly and then you're like, wait, nobody wants this, then you got to change.
Agreed. So, Rohit, I didn't get to ask you this on the last show, but we'll do it at least on this one. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
What is my favorite kind of shark?
Yeah,
You're
you're
going to test my shark knowledge.
yeah, and you write about something in one of your chapters, so this will go perfect if you give the wrong answer.
Okay, so I don't remember what I wrote about in that last one, so I'll have to like remember that. But I'm gonna go with um, let's say the hammerhead shark because for some reason I remember that one because it looks unlike anything else that is out there, and I
Yeah,
think
that's
that it's the non-obvious shark, which probably makes sense for me to pick it then.
well, that's perfect. So if you'd said bull shark, I would have called you out on it because you write about too much testosterone when talking about engendering, and the bull shark has more testosterone than any other animal on the planet. So that was the reason.
Okay, all right. See,
that was the
I
reason.
learned something new, right?
Yeah,
I learned something new. You're living up to your brand, so that's good.
exactly. So I am a hammerhead on my own. So, well, Rohit, we've done this once before, so it's that special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I am ready.
All right, number 1. 9 years of trend books, or 2010 through 2019, or the 2020 Megatrends book.
2020 Megatrends book, for sure.
Why
the one
so?
That took me, because it took me 10 years to get to the ideas that are in this one.
Fair enough. Number 2. Pink Post-its or yellow Post-its?
Yellow Post-its, because I got to be on brand.
Yeah, and I'll have to put that picture up as well, because anybody hadn't seen
Yes.
it's a little bit scary. So number 3, automation in marketing technology or empathy as a bigger trend?
Always 1000% empathy.
Would agree. Number 4, being an author, a speaker, and a marketer, or being a dad, as far as where you're going to get the most information from an audience?
I mean, for me, personal fulfillment, easy, dad. When it comes to learning, like, I probably have learned more from being a parent than just about anything else.
Yeah, I would say the same. So, number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today, I don't know if you remember this from before: biscuits or cornbread?
I'll go with cornbread because I went to school in Atlanta.
There you go. All right, go Dogs. So, Rohit, where can people find out more about you, follow your thought leadership, get a copy of the book, and more?
You can find out about the entire Non-Obvious series at nonobvious.com. No dashes, just all one word, nonobvious.com. And if you want to if you want to watch videos of past talks of mine or any of that sort of stuff, you can go to my personal site. It's rohitbhargava.com.
Awesome. Rohit, thank you again for joining us on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you. I had a great time.
So there was my part 2 conversation with Rohit Bhargava, the best-selling author of Non-Obvious Megatrends, How to See What Others Miss and Predict the Future, a professor, keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, and the founder and chief trend curator for the Non-Obvious Company. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, I've really enjoyed reading these books over the years because he doesn't state the obvious. Look, I hope that I'm not guilty of doing this same thing I complain about often. When looking at trends, don't state the obvious, and don't Google trends either. I go nuts when I see so-called top names I've never heard of get cited on some media publications' trends to watch in the next year, and what some, not all, have done is state a fact looking back and not a trend looking forward. We also talked about his biggest mega trend that he's seen over the last decade. And at least my takeaway on that is that I'm amazed over the last decade how much data we have given away and how much more sophisticated the technology is for interpreting that data and then using it without us knowing. I saw a lot of this when working in big data. Think about everything that people put out on social, just as an example. Facebook's no poster child for best practices. Look at how much interest is going into a platform like TikTok and how that could be a concern over national interest with possible Chinese government backing. Your Echo or home device could have listened to you when you didn't know. It's been in the news. Think about all of the data points on your phone that you give away with apps. All forms of technology are moving ahead so quickly, but the data of who you are is no longer just yours. I would love to see a megatrend where privacy actually meant something. Second, it is so unbelievably important to me that marketers and business leaders need to be curious by nature. As he said, most people silence that curiosity, and that is so true. And he talked about kids being curious, and that is unbelievably true. And you should know that sharks are curious by nature. That's why we're often misunderstood. So be curious. Third, one of my favorite quotes from him: the world needs more non-obvious thinkers, and I could not agree more. Think for yourself, make up your own mind, and stop Googling everything. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. So here's a trend worth noting. I'll be back, and I hope that you'll join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.